For those of you who are not familiar, I suspect there are many of you here who know much more about the right to housing than I do, because you experience the violations that we see all over the world. Canada is not immune from that. But the right to adequate housing is a human right that has been recognized in international human rights instruments since the Universal Declaration was drafted. And it's in numerous covenants and conventions that Canada has ratified, including on economic, social, cultural rights, racial discrimination, discrimination against women, the rights of the child. And it's a very, very widely recognized right that has it's the adequate housing, so it includes habitability, it includes security of tenure, it includes cultural adequacy. But in my mandate, I also interpreted it very broadly and interpreted it from indivisibility of human rights perspective. So I look very much at the right to security of the home, security of the person, freedom from inhuman and degrading treatment. And in my mandate, my interpretation of the mandate given to me by the Council, I also had a particular focus on women's rights to housing and land. And also looked at issues like the link of violence against women and the right to adequate housing. We've looked at issues related to multiple forms of discrimination. We've looked at issues related to the need for privacy, information, consultation, freedom from violence for women as being integrally part of the right to adequate housing. So when we were planning this mission here, and based on the information that many of you have sent over the years, and based on the previous reviews of Canada that different UN human rights bodies have undertaken, we decided on 4 themes for the mission. The first one, no particular order, but it was on homelessness, the phenomenon of growing homelessness and the causes of that. The second was on women's rights to adequate housing and land. The third is origin rights to housing and land. And the fourth is the whole issue of affordability of housing and the issue of income support and the difficulties, serious problems being faced in that regard. So with those in mind, we are towards the end of the mission. This is the last city stop. And as Michael mentioned, we've been to many different parts of the country, and we've taken testimonies from dozens of women, men. We've talked to single women, we've talked to elderly women, we've talked to Aboriginal people, we've talked to youth, we've met some children. We've tried to speak as much as possible and spend as much time as possible on the streets, in the shelters, in the transition homes, in hostels and so forth. I mean, the main purpose of this evening, I think, is for me to listen to what is happening here in Toronto. But I can share with you some preliminary remarks of what I feel is going on here. I'm going to be having a closing press conference in Ottawa on Monday, where we will be releasing some preliminary observations. We'll be releasing a document, but I'm happy to share my as I said, very, very tentative preliminary conclusions with you. I, of course, am familiar with the situation in developed countries. In the last year, I have also done missions in developed countries. I've done missions to Australia and Spain, and I follow very closely the situation in the United States and several Western European countries and here over the years. But let me just say that as I travel around the country and I see for myself, there are 3 words that really stick in my mind. It's devastation, despair, and hope. I think the scale of the problem that I see, people being homeless on the street, the depth of the homelessness, the chronic nature of it, is very striking. It's at a scale bigger than I had imagined. It's very visible in Edmonton, it's very visible in Vancouver. I suspect it's the same here. And there's obviously a lot more that can be done. I'm also struck by the uncoordinated nature of how different levels of government function here in Canada. The 3 levels of government, which I think everybody's very surprised. It's quite striking because I think that an issue as important as housing should not be something that is dealt with in such a manner. It should not be dealt with the stopgap policy measures, programs that start and end. At each provincial level perspective also on housing. And I will be calling for there to be much more a longer-term commitment. I'm very surprised that an issue as serious as homelessness does not have, there's a homelessness partnership initiative, there are many other initiatives, but they're very time-bound and very short. And obviously all of us who have seen homelessness, and particularly for those who have experienced it, it's not something that can be dealt with in the short term. It requires longer-term programs. I should also say that I have been very impressed with some of the initiatives that are being taken in the cities around the country. We have visited youth homes, emergency homes, transitional housing. We visited shelters for housing actually for Aboriginal women who are escaping violence. We visited many examples, including here in Toronto today, which need to be recognized, which need to be supported, which need to be replicated. And there has to be a longer-term commitment to those types of solutions. And we have talked to service providers across the country. They're all struggling. People are using volunteers. They're using private foundation money. They're just, and all of them are, I always ask everybody the same question. What you're doing is enough? And always the answer was no, we need 5 more shelters like this. We need, 10 more transitional housing buildings. And I think that those valiant efforts that we see on the ground need to be recognized, they need to be built upon. So it's not weird. I think all of us are not asking for something that is from somewhere else or that is impossible. It's been done here before. I think Canada, for those of us who have spent large parts of our lives working on housing before the early 90s, was an example for many of the policies. There are, of course, long-term issues such as the state of Aboriginal housing, the state of the Aboriginal communities, the lack of self-determination. But I don't get. We can discuss that as well. But there is much more that can be done, that must be done, both in the short term and the long term. And I will also call for what I have in other countries, sort of a combination of a humanitarian and a human rights approach. Because what we see out there are situations where people are in daily threat of life, serious health risks, and we need much longer-term commitments. That would only be consistent with Canada's obligations on the right of adequate housing with the international human rights instruments. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm very much convinced of the work that civil society has done. Many recommendations that have come. And I can see from visiting the country that much more needs to be done in terms of mobilizing, networking, and I sincerely hope that whatever I come up with, whatever little I can do, will be helpful to you in your work. Thanks very much.
Barbara Hall, the Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. The Commission, as mentioned earlier, has had province-wide consultation on the right to adequate housing, or the right to housing, and Barbara will speak a bit about that. Barbara.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleague, Commissioner Ruth Goma,